Good morning and happy Chanukah to everybody, each of you, to your families. And we're going to jump straight in to where we were left off last week. We're having the discussion. We were involved in a deep Torah discussion of how to understand whether or not the prohibition of not benefiting from the offerings and the accessory, not benefiting from idolatry, and particularly the offerings of idolatry, is something that's going to apply to a non-Jew. And so we took a look at it last week from one angle, and Rabbi Steif is going to continue a couple different angles. Watch the previous video if you didn't see it yet, because it discusses the very narrow set of circumstances in which this question is going to apply. And we're down the top of page 328. On the left column. And here we go. So we were discussing last week the question of this concept of a sacrifice, animal sacrifice that's brought on Shabbos, that's slaughtered on Shabbos, not brought, I'm sorry, it's slaughtered on Shabbos, and it is slaughtered outside the Temple Mount. And the question is if a Jewish person was to slaughter this animal, are they obligated? So on one hand, it seems like slaughtering this animal is a complete waste. And in terms of the forbidden labors on Shabbos, if a person is going to do something that's a complete waste that has no constructive purpose, then it's like it's not culpable for this activity. So from a Shabbos perspective. So obviously a person is not allowed to just slaughter an animal. In fact, we have requirements to not be cruel to animals. Tzar Baalei Chaim is a prohibition. You can't be unnecessarily cruel to animals, or can't be cruel at all to animals. In fact, the whole slaughtering process is to be done with an extremely sharp, perfectly sharp knife, so that the animal, when it's slaughtered, feels no sensation of pain whatsoever. It shouldn't even feel the slightest tearing of its skin. That's how sharp the knife has to be. And we've all experienced that. Sometimes if you've ever been around a really, really sharp knife and cut yourself, you'll notice that the actual cutting experience, there's no pain from the actual act of cutting. The contact between the blade and the skin doesn't cause any pain. Or the cutting through doesn't cause any pain. Afterwards, obviously, you want to take care of it. But the slaughtering process has to be done in such a way that the animal feels no sensation from the knife. And it's very, very interesting to think about this for a second, because this animal is dying. I mean, it's being slaughtered. It has no future. The pain is it's going to be dead in a fraction of a second. And yet, even for a fraction of a second, it's forbidden to cause an animal pain. And so, and there's a second commandment that applies. So one commandment is not to Tzar Baalei Chaim, you can't cause pain to an animal. Another commandment that would be implicated is Bal Tashchis, you can't waste things. God's creations are not meant to be wasted. So an example would be, I contacted a kosher slaughterer, a sheikhet, who was slaughtering some birds, and he first wanted to understand, because we wanted to eat them, and he first wanted to make sure that we would have a setup in place to take care of what needs to be done with the animal afterwards. So the first is the kosher slaughter process. Then it has to be feathered, and it has to be, I'm talking about birds over here, then it has to be, the meat has to be washed and salted, and certain veins have to be cut or taken out. And this all needs to be done in order to actually use the food. So his question to me was, do you have that all set up in process? Because that in place, do you have a a person or a place that you're going to take care of this, or do you know how to do this yourself? Because the slaughterer is only going to do the slaughtering of the animal. Because he said it would be bal tashchis. It's forbidden. It would be a complete waste of this animal's life and the existence of this animal. Like God Almighty is going to the trouble of not. I mean, there's no trouble for God, but I'm saying he's putting the intention and effort into creating this bird, and for it to be just slaughtered, even though it's kosherly slaughtered in a kosher way, but for that bird then to just go to waste. Meaning to say, if I didn't have the next steps already lined up to take care of, then he would slaughter it and it would go to waste. It would end up in the garbage. And that, he says, he is not going to participate in actually slaughtering the animal, because his slaughtering it would be an act of wasting the animal if there's no process in place to actually make sure it's put to good use. So that's another really, really important understanding to see the importance of our recognition of God Almighty's creative activity in every single thing. So we also apply that to even inanimate objects. We don't go just around destroying things and so forth. We don't waste things. We try to use them properly. Not out of fear. We're not more driven by fear and worried about the lack of, is there going to be a lack of resources or something like that? No, God Almighty is creating everything we need, but we're conscious of the godliness, the fact that everything is being created by God Almighty, and therefore we're going to use it properly in an honorable way. So the reason I say all this and emphasize this as a preface to what we're discussing about, because I'm going to say something here that is, it's shocking in the sense that we're saying over here that if a person was to take an animal and he was just to stab it to death on Shabbos, he would not be violating a Shabbos prohibition. So I want to make sure you understand that it's not allowed. He's not allowed to do that. He's violating the commandment to not harm, cause pain to an animal. And he's violating the commandment not to be wasteful and to be destructive of God's creations. But we're talking about it. So, but if he was going to do a kosher slaughtering on Shabbos, then that would be something that he would be culpable for, because it's a constructive activity. But if he stabs the animal, then and kills it, is not causing he's not doing anything constructive. He's doing something destructive, which is prohibited. But he's not culpable from a Shabbos perspective. He hasn't done anything constructive on Shabbos. So it's important to see which angle we're looking at it over here. So this person goes ahead and he is now, we're talking about back to a situation where a person is going to slaughter the animal with a proper slaughtering, but he does it for idolatry and he does it outside the temple mount. Then what does he accomplish? He hasn't done anything constructive with it, because it's something that's forbidden to use, and it is something that is can't be brought as a sacrifice. It can't be, because it was sacrificed outside the temple mount, and it can't be eaten because it was sacrificed for idolatry. So the question is this person who does this, is he culpable or not? If he did something that has at least some constructive value, then he would be culpable. If he has no constructive value, he's not culpable. So here, in this case, we say that he has done something constructive, which is a startling conclusion, because we just said it can't be brought as a sacrifice and it can't be eaten. So what possible constructive benefit is there from this having been slaughtered for idolatry outside the Temple Mount on Shabbos? And the answer is that because it was slaughtered and is now officially, the animal's officially dead, that if a non-Jew was to eat it at that point in time, he would not be violating the prohibition that applies to every single human being not to eat a limb of a living animal, because the animal is now dead. And we can know that it's dead in a way that it wasn't dismembered or anything while it was still alive. So this shows us that this is now he's culpable. He's done something of constructive value to this animal, even though it was brought to for idolatry, sacrifice for idolatry, and it was outside the temple now. But then the question is, well, once again, if the non-Jew could eat it, does that mean maybe that a non-Jew could benefit from something that was offered for idolatry? So the answer is no. We're not saying that it's permissible for the non-Jew to eat it. It's just we're saying that if he was to eat it, he would be exempt from the culpability for eating the limb of a living animal, which is a capital crime. So, but it's still forbidden for him to do it on the basis that it's an offering for idolatry. So that's where we're up to from last week. And now we're over here. That was in this part over here, Yud Base, number 12. And now we're going to continue over here. We're going to look into this from different angles more deeply. And as I said before, last week, we'll try to get through this week to complete this. But if this is something that just, your eyes are glazing over and you're not following all the nuances and the details, that's totally fine. Don't stress about it, because it requires a lot of background, a lot of understanding to see how every detail of the words of the Torah are taken literally, are meant literally, and we have to weigh the application of each word and each concept to each particular situation. And so that's what we're going through over here. If you are able to follow it, and it's something that you could wrap your mind around it, so to speak, then for sure follow along. And if you don't, you could just listen and know that we're going to get to the bottom line, and you could just get a glimpse into the process and the responsibility that we have to learn Torah and to learn the Torah that applies to the non-Jews, so that you can reach the right conclusions that are going to apply to guide human beings in coming closer and closer to God Almighty, and connecting to God Almighty, and connecting to each other. So, we need to examine, according to what the Rambam, Maimonides, writes in Hilchos Malachim and the Laws of Kings, Perktes Halacha Yud Aleph, in the 9th chapter, in the 11th law, the Ein Ben Noach Musar Iver Min Chai Ba'if. He writes over there that a non-Jew is not, the wording over here is warned. I looked it up actually in the Rambam itself, and it says Neharag is not executed. But it could be that the Rabbi Steif had a different version. Sometimes there's slight variations in the versions of the Rambam, but I didn't get a chance to look and see if there's actually different versions, or he just wrote it down this way that he's not warned. But he's not commanded, it would seem, about the limb of a living bird. Meaning to say, we're going to see what that means. Does that mean that he's allowed to just rip a wing off or leg off a bird and eat it? Or does it mean he's not executed for doing that? Because we know that if a person was to go and cut off a piece of a leg, God forbid, of a cow, a living animal, and he bites into it or he cooks it and he eats it, that's forbidden for him to do that, and it's also a capital crime. The Rambam is writing, this capital crime concept does not apply when it's involving a bird. So he's saying that we can't understand this to mean that it's okay for a non-Jew to go eat the limb of a living bird. No, it just means that it's not a capital crime when it involves a bird. It is still forbidden. Nevertheless, he's still warned against it. It's still prohibited to eat the limb of a living bird. The habechulin mukminan habraisa the sheichel chatas b'Shabbos b'eif b'chetzi kana pogum ve'al kol chatzai loimer k'moshe kasav v'kesav mishtam bigdal eiz the Rambam made al kol panim asal b'nei Noach eivim min achai fil b'eif. And he says, he looks into what it says in the Talmud in Chulin. It's talking about a teaching about slaughtering a animal sacrifice on Shabbos with involving a bird, and half the windpipe was cut, and so it has to be. He says, therefore, we're forced to say, based on looking at everything in context, we have to say that, like it says, the Kesef Mishnah and the Migdal Oils, which are commentaries on the Rambam, the Rambam made the Al Kolpanim also the Bnei Noach lechol ev min achai afilu b'leif. That the Rambam agrees that for sure it's forbidden for a Ben Noach, for a non-Jew, to eat the limb of a living creature, even from a bird. But it's not it's not a death penalty for that. Now he's bringing from a different source here. So he said this already up here. Now he's bringing from a different source. So therefore, when we say that a non-Jew is forbidden to benefit from the offerings for idolatry, we still have the question of what we learned before in the Talmud in Pesachim, on the Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, on the 73rd page on the first side. Tikun, what did exactly what we say before? What did the person accomplish constructively? And why would he be obligated for violating the Sabbath, violating Shabbos, by slaughtering this animal outside the temple mount for the sake of idolatry? What did he accomplish from that? Because the person, since he was slaughtering a bird, he wasn't going to be obligated for the death penalty anyways. So what was this non-Jew, so to speak, saved from the fact that it was slaughtered? So even though he took it out of the category of being forbidden for being a limb of a living creature, nevertheless, we still have it forbidden for being a offering of idolatry. So at the end of this paragraph, we've got to the conclusion that the something that is brought as an animal of sacrifice for idolatry is forbidden to a non-Jew, and the fact that the Jew who did this slaughtering in the on Shabbos outside the Temple Mount for the sake of idolatry, God forbid, and that he's obligated culpable for violating the Shabbos is because he's taken it out of the category, done something constructive, taken it out of the category of being something that would be a limb of a living animal. That does not in any way permit that animal to be eaten by the non-Jew, because that animal was brought with idolatry as the intention behind it. It was sacrificed with the intention of sacrificing for idolatry, and therefore it's forbidden to a non-Jew. Now we're on to the next paragraph. Matzati b'sefer Chemdas Yisrael. I found in the holy book Chemdas Yisrael, Shekasav Sharab Mechabim Shnei Kubuzeh, that he saw written in the writings of various writers that were doubtful about this. They were questioning this. They were trying to examine this question. If a non-Jew is permitted to benefit from idolatry, who is and he, blessed memory, and he says there's no doubt about this at all. It says in our holy Torah, in the Parsha of Yishlach and Beishis, Genesis chapter 35, verse 2, Sha'amar Yaakov Levanov, Jacob says to his sons, remove from yourself the foreign gods that you have among yourselves. Now, where did they get foreign gods from? These were God-fearing people. Why would they have idols? The Kasav Rashi Shahaya Biyadam Meshalosh Shem. They had in their possession the booty, the items that had been captured as a result of the war that Shimon and Levi conducted against the people of Shechem. If you remember, there was Dinah, their sister, had been captured and violated by the prince of the city of Shechem, and two of her brothers, Shimon and Levi, executed judgment on the city. Why did they why were they able to execute judgment on all the men? Because there's a commandment that applies to all human beings that they have to have, every human being is responsible for there being courts of justice. And so since this sister of theirs was raped, and rape is a capital crime, and he was, this prince was not brought to justice, so the responsibility for his crime now spread to the entire population, because they did not set up a court, judge him, and then punish him accordingly. And so therefore, Shimon and Levi judged them according to the law. The Torah law says that one of the responsibilities of non-Jews is that they have to have courts of law. And if they don't have courts of law, that itself is a capital crime. So in the process of conquering that city, of executing the judgment against the city, they weren't conquering because they wanted to take the land or the people or the possessions. They were executing the judgment. Once they executed the judgment, they now had all this items from the city, which included idolatrous items. So they took these things. And the question is, how could they take them? Because even though this was the sons of Jacob, and it was before the giving of the Torah, but at the same time, they were obligated at a minimum in the commandments that apply to the non-Jews, because all human beings were obligated under the same laws. There was the 7 laws and the 30 laws we talk about, and hundreds of details and the infinite details of them, applies to all human beings. So for sure it applies to the sons of Jacob, even though there was before Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah and to Moses, our teacher, on Mount Sinai, when there were additional commandments given to the Jewish people. Nevertheless, even at this earlier stage, this law that the laws of idolatry applied. So if the sons of Jacob were able to take these idolatrous items, which are no longer being used for idolatry, but they were able to take them into their possession, that would seem to imply that a non-Jew, since the sons of Jacob were legally had the status of the obligations of a non-Jew, since they had these idolatrous items in their possession, it would seem to imply that it's permissible for a non-Jew to benefit from idolatry, because whatever they were using, they weren't using it for idolatry. So I don't know, maybe they were using it for a paperweight, or they were using it for I don't know what they were using it for. It's not really clear what they were benefiting from these things, but maybe they took an idol and they were using it as a, to beat schnitzel or some of that, or I don't know what they were doing with it. But the fact that Jacob was saying to them, okay, take all this stuff and get rid of it. How did they have it that they had to get rid of it? They must have been permitted to have it. That's what's being implied over here. So like Rashi says, in explaining the simple meaning of the verse of the Torah, that there was in their hands from the booty of Shem, so we could prove from this, according to this opinion, that a non-Jew is not prohibited, not warned from the prohibition of benefiting from idolatry. Ayin Sham, go take a look over there. Look at more detail. And it's also could be proven or supported, this argument, on the words of the Rambam, the Sefer Mitzvos Hashem, in his book, where he lists all the commandments of the Torah. And he writes over there, which is that are warned to distance ourselves from the activities of idolatry and from their service. It would seem to be implied by the words he chooses that benefiting from idolatry is not a prohibition. This is the end of the words of the Chamdas Yisrael. But nearly the and it looks to me, let me pull up the next page over here. Yeah, hopefully you can see now. Page 329. Chanukah. And so now we're going to see another interesting case over here. What about the following Rabbi Steif is saying? We have another case that's going to give us some insight into this. Nearly another proof I could observation I could use to permit this this benefiting from idolatry to a non-Jew. From the fact that it's prohibited for a Jew to sell to a non-Jew wheat, shenaflo laim yayin, that fell upon that wheat wine. So you can't. So let's put background over here. Wine, we said already, wine that's used as a libation offering for idolatry is forbidden. We know for sure it's forbidden for a Jew to use. We're now trying to understand if it's forbidden for a non-Jew to use. Obviously, he can't use his wine for idolatry, and he can't participate in an idolatrous ceremony using wine. But the question is, after the fact, is he allowed to benefit from it? And here we have a situation that says that in the Talmud, in a tractate on idolatry, Avodah Zarah, in the 65th page on the second side, it says that if a non-Jew, if a Jew has wheat and wine of a non-Jew, which we presume that since it was so prevalent, the pouring of wine libations for idolatrous offerings, that all wine that's in the possession of a non-Jew was used for the purposes of this wine libation. So therefore it's forbidden for a Jew to drink it. We don't examine the actual details. We assume as a general prohibition that all wine in the possession of a non-Jew, because of the prevalence of the idolatrous practices, we assume that it was used for idolatry. Therefore it's forbidden for a Jew to drink it or possess it. So what happens if this wine spills onto wheat? Okay, so now you have a wheat that got some wine on it. Can the Jew sell the wheat to the non-Jew? And the answer is no. But the answer given is because maybe this in part of a business transaction, now this wheat with this wine on it is in the stream of commerce. And this non-Jew is going to buy the wheat that has the wine in it. He's going to turn around. He's going to sell it to another Jew. Now the Jew is not going to know what the wine in it, and he's going to eat it. He's going to prepare this wheat, and he's going to prepare stuff from it. He's going to be now using what includes wine for that we're presuming was used for idolatry, and which is forbidden for the Jew to use. So the question is, one second here. If we're saying it's forbidden to sell the wheat that's now has this wine on it, if the non-Jew was forbidden to benefit from that wine because it was used for idolatry, then it should say it's forbidden to sell it to a non-Jew because he's not allowed to possess this wine-soaked wheat. The fact that we say that's what we should have said if it was forbidden to him. The fact that we say, no, we can't sell it to him because he might come back to sell it to another Jew who's forbidden to use it, seems to imply that for the non-Jew, if he was going to buy it with this idolatrous wine in it and use it for himself, then that wouldn't be a problem. If we knew for sure that we make sure he's going to use it for himself, it wouldn't be a problem, which seems to imply that the wine, the benefiting from this wine used for idolatry, presumed to be used for idolatry, is not forbidden to the non-Jew. Should have said that nevertheless it's forbidden to sell it to the non-Jew because he shouldn't benefit from the wine that was used for libation. So it's provable from this, Rabbi Steif is suggesting, that it's permissible for the non-Jew to benefit from it because we're allowing it to be, we're only reason we're preventing it from being sold to him is because he might sell it to another Jew, who's then going to be transgressing by drinking it, eating the wheat with it. But he himself could benefit from the non-Jew could benefit from it. So he says, we could push away this suggestion. The Sham Stam Yainim. There, it's talking about what's called Stam Yainim. So there's Yain Nesach, that's wine that we know for sure is used for libation. And then there's Yain Stam, which is the wine of a non-Jew. Like we said before, we just assume. So that's called wine Stam. It's just called wine in general of a non-Jew, which we treat in the same way as wine that it was for sure used for libations. So in this case here that the Talmud is talking about wine that we don't, it's just Stam Yain, meaning to say it's just general wine of a non-Jew. There's no evidence that it was actually used for wine libation. So therefore, it would be okay to sell it to the non-Jew because it wasn't particularly used for idolatrous purposes. So you could sell it to him, except for the fact that he might come and sell it back to a Jew who's forbidden also in the general any wine from a non-Jew, because we're concerned, even without any evidence that in this particular case it was used for idolatry, we're concerned that it could have been used for idolatry. So Rabbi Steif is telling us that here, this case in the Gemara, the reason that we would have allowed to sell it to the non-Jew is because it's not really idolatrous wine. We don't have any evidence that it was. We're just creating a blanket prohibition to protect that a Jew shouldn't come to use idolatrous wine. We're not going to participate in any wine that a non-Jew is involved with, because we're assuming that due to his idolatrous practices in general, it has a, more likely than not, it's going to be involved in idolatry. And also we could say, the Sham lo haya iser hana be'ein hi'im taima. And another reason to say that it's not such it would be possible to consider selling it to the non-Jew is for another concept to take into account. So you see how many different angles you have to look at this from. That this forbiddenness, this forbidden wine, the problematic item that's mixed in with this wheat, which is this wine, is not ba'ain. It's not something that you could see it. You have hundreds of thousands of grains of wheat and you pour a bottle of wine on it. You can't go in anywhere find any drops of wine. Ki'im taima, but you could still taste a little bit of it. It's having an effect on the taste of the wheat because it got touched by this wine. And we might say that a non-Jew is not prohibited in what's called tam ki'ikr, that the taste of something is not considered the thing itself. Meaning to say that if you have merely the flavor transfers into something, then maybe that, while it would be problematic for a Jew, it would not be problematic for a non-Jew. So, because the question is, if you just have the flavor of something, like a trace of something that creates a flavor, it's enough of the trace of it that it flavors the mixture. But there's no actual identifiable wine, idolatrous wine left in that mixture. So for a Jew, that would be forbidden because the taste of it, is considered as if it's the thing itself. But the question is, maybe that doesn't apply to a non-Jew. That concept, that aspect of the law doesn't apply. So for a non-Jew, it has to be the real thing itself. We're not going to say it's prohibited just because merely there's a taste. So if that's the case, that it's only because it's a taste of it's remaining after it got mixed in, and it's not the actual thing. And if this was not to apply to a non-Jew, then that's the reason that it would be permissible to sell it to him, because it's not we're saying that it's permissible for him to benefit from idolatrous wine. It's just that there is really no idolatrous wine left in this mixture with the wheat. It's just some taste left over because it got absorbed in, And that would be forbidden to a Jew, but it's not forbidden to a non-Jew. So therefore, the conclusion is it requires more looking into this. If I am a klalim erech tam higer, and look more into the general rules of this concept of whether a taste is considered like the thing itself. So we can conclude from this that he's saying that about this example of the wine falling into the wheat, that it's not a conclusive evidence that it's permissible for a non-Jew to benefit from idolatry, because it could be that the nature of the wine that's still perceptible is not falling into a category of existence that would be something that's prohibited. But it couldn't be that the wine itself, if you offered a glass of wine to a non-Jew, that would still be prohibited. You couldn't benefit. You couldn't trade in it. Okay, so that we've got through this long paragraph 12 over here. We'll continue next week with number 13, which we're going to get into another discussion now about what can you do with idolatrous things to nullify them. What's considered nullifying them from their idolatry? Obviously, you could destroy the thing completely, but what degree of effort is required, or how far do you have to go to actually eliminate the idolatry from the thing? And that's what we're going to start exploring next week. Any questions? Okay, no questions. That's fine. So I want to conclude with a reminder about Chanukah and the great joy of Chanukah. And Chanukah, we discussed it last week in great detail. There's other classes we put up on the rabbismith.org and on the YouTube channel. But the primary energy of Chanukah is is an energy of great joy. And knowing, we often get weighed down by our thinking about how are we're so tiny, and seems to be so many forces that are lined up doing things that are not appropriate and so forth. And we have to remember that if we stay connected to God Almighty, and our goal is to bring every human being into connection with God Almighty, and we'll for sure be victorious, because that was the goal of the 13, a handful and a bit of Jewish men that took up the cause against these hundreds of thousands of Greek soldiers, and against their apathy and even active assimilation of the Jewish brethren. And yet God Almighty granted great victory for them, miraculous military victory, and miraculous the miracle of the oil burning for 8 days. And we therefore have to live now in the joy of the expectation of the salvation, of the ultimate redemption, knowing that God Almighty is taking care of every single one of his human beings. Everyone here and everyone who's watching this, every human being. And that's the great joy that we need to live with, and the great joy that we need to spread to every single human being. So I want to wish you happy what's the blessing we say on Hanukkah? So in Hebrew we say Chag Sameach, a happy holiday, joyous holiday. In Yiddish we say Freilichen Hanukkah, a joyous Hanukkah, because it's really about the joy of celebrating the miracles of God's salvation, people who want to do the right things thousands of years ago, and the anticipation and expectation of that to continue now, and to see the ultimate miracle of the redemption of all of humanity from the things that are trying to darken the world, of the ideas that are trying to darken the world, the ideas that are trying to take people away from their connection to God Almighty. And we know with certainty that God Almighty is going to bring about a revelation of, within every single human being, of their divine spark. And we to need to know that the joy is part of the process, meaning to say the joy itself is what breaks the boundaries. The joy itself is what breaks the restrictions, breaks down the numbing hold that foreign ideologies have on us. When we're happy, even when we can't see exactly how it's all going to work out, we're just happy and happy to be alive and happy to know that God loves us, is creating us, is taking care of us. And that joy itself helps us break out of the stuck thinking, break out of the stuck feelings, and break out of the stuck relationship with God Almighty, the stuck relationship with our fellows and our family. And that joy is what then is contagiously spreads to other people and brings about the ultimate redemption, the ultimate joy, where there's going to be simchas eilam al resham. It's going to be eternal joy for every single human being. God bless you all. Happy Chanukah. We'll look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. So may I ask a quick question?
Sure.
Is Torah study today limited because of the day?
No, those that practice that limitation is only last night, between dark nightfall and midnight. But today there's no.
Thank you.
After midnight, there's no limitation. So you're clear to learn Torah. Go ahead, enjoy.
Yes. No, I must just, if we cannot let our Torah study be affected by idolaters, because if we get 365 groups of idolaters who have their holiday on every day of the year, then we would not be learning Torah.
No, God forbid. So, there's some people that do hold of this, not learning Torah on the eve of Xmas, and some don't have the custom to do that. But those that have the custom do it on the basis that this particular idolatry is something that has had a tremendously devastating impact on the world. So therefore, that's why it would be in those that practice, who refrain from Torah study on the night of the eve of Xmas, is only not to strengthen the forces of a promotion of idolatrous concepts. So that's why it is particular to that particular night. But it's limited, and like we did last night, that gathering. We told stories of tzaddikim, stories of righteous people. There's plenty of other holy occupations for our time that we could do, and yes, we certainly want to appreciate every moment we have to learn Torah and to throw ourselves into it with full vigor.
Thank you very much.
Very welcome. God bless you all. Take care. Happy Chanukah. Yes.